Dusty Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1873. Three escaped killers thought they'd found an easy target in the white-haired cowboy, drinking alone in the corner. They were dead wrong. Samuel Hawkins hadn't drawn his legendary matched Colts in 15 years. Not since the day a stray bullet took an innocent life. Before that, he was Steady Hand Sam, the deadliest lawman in the West, with 97 confirmed kills and a shooting accuracy that made hardened outlaws surrender rather than face him. He'd been U.S. Marshal in 7 territories, brought 19 murderers to justice, and once shot the guns out of the hands of all 5 Coulter brothers without spilling a drop of blood. The 3 prison escapees didn't know they were bullying the man who'd once been personally thanked by President Grant for services rendered to a grateful nation. As they kicked his table and grabbed his whiskey, they had no idea they'd just signed their own death warrants. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn broke over Samuel Hawkins' modest cabin, nestled against the foothills 5 miles outside Dusty Creek. He rose with the sun, a habit from 40 years riding the frontier. His weathered hands moved with precision as he stoked the fire and set coffee to boil, each motion betraying the disciplined economy of a man who once moved faster than the eye could follow. The small mirror above his wash basin reflected a face carved by time and hardened by experience. Beneath his silver hair and lined features remained the same piercing blue eyes that had stared down the barrel at some of the West's most notorious outlaws. Age had added years, but taken little from his lean frame. At 68, Samuel Still stood straight as a pine, his movements deliberate and sure. 20 years ago, they'd written newspaper stories about Steady Hand Sam, the fastest, most accurate lawman ever to wear a marshal's badge. 7 governors had personally requested his services. His exploits had become campfire tales told to wide-eyed children. How he'd once disarmed all 5 Coulter brothers without firing a fatal shot, or tracked the Blackwater gang across 3 territories in the dead of winter. Samuel poured his coffee into a chipped enamel cup and stepped onto the porch. 6 prime Mustangs grazed in the morning light, his livelihood now. Breaking horses for local ranchers, a far cry from pursuing outlaws across unforgiving terrain or cleaning up lawless mining towns. Just how he wanted it. He flexed his right hand, studying it. Still no tremor. His eyes could still track a hawk circling a half-mile up. Time had weathered his face and silvered his hair, but it hadn't dulled the skills that once made him the fastest drawer in the West. "Mornin' Sam" came, a friendly voice from the road. Martha Wilson pulled her wagon to a stop, supplies from her general store stacked in the back. At 56, her face still carried traces of the beauty that had turned heads in her youth, though her dark hair now showed streaks of gray. "Brought those horseshoes you ordered, and some news." Martha was perhaps the only person in Dusty Creek who knew Samuel's true identity. She'd recognized him when he first arrived 15 years ago, having seen his likeness on wanted posters during her time back east. She'd never betrayed his confidence. "Obliged," Samuel said, taking the package. "What news?" "New sheriff arrived yesterday. Young fellow named Cooper. Barely looks old enough to shave." She paused. "And there's talk about a prison break from Yuma. 5 men, led by a real nasty piece of work called Blackjack Morgan." Samuel stiffened almost imperceptibly. He'd put Blackjack Morgan away himself 12 years ago. The man had sworn vengeance, like they all did. "Town's worried," Martha continued. "These men are killers, Sam, not your usual troublemakers." "Not my concern anymore," Samuel said quietly. "Those days are behind me." Martha studied him with knowing eyes. "Some things don't stay buried, Sam, no matter how deep we put them. After she left, Samuel walked to his stable where Thunder, his midnight black stallion, nickered softly. The horse was 17 hands of pure power, bred from the same line as the mount he'd ridden as a marshal. In the back corner, beneath loose floorboards and 15 years of dust, lay a cedar box he hadn't opened since settling here. Inside rested twin Colt .45 revolvers with custom ivory grips, a tarnished marshal's badge, and yellowed wanted posters of men long dead or still imprisoned. Men. Like Blackjack Morgan, Samuel replaced the floorboard without opening the box. That life was over. He'd made sure of that after the tragedy in Silverton, when his bullet had found not only the outlaw he was aiming for, but also a young boy who darted into the street at the wrong moment. He'd hung up his guns that day, vanishing into the vastness of the West, becoming just another aging cowboy with secrets buried deeper than most. For 15 peaceful years, Samuel Hawkins had been simply the old horse trainer outside town. And that's how he intended to remain, no matter what storm was brewing on the horizon. Dusty Creek wasn't much, a single street with weathered boardwalks, a dozen businesses, and enough hope to justify its name. By midday, Samuel had ridden Thunder into town for supplies, and to take measure of this new lawman everyone was talking. About Sheriff James Cooper stood outside the jailhouse, conspicuous in his clean duster and shiny badge. Couldn't be more than 30, Samuel noted, with an eastern cut to his clothes and a Colt revolver that looked barely fired. The boy was scanning the street with the nervous energy of someone expecting trouble, but not quite sure what it looked like. "That's him," Martha whispered as Samuel passed her store. "Mayor hired him from back east. Has some book learning about law enforcement, but I'd wager he's never faced down anything meaner than a schoolyard bully." Samuel nodded without comment. Continuing toward the livery, he tied Thunder outside and was examining a new bridle when he felt eyes on him. "Morning, sir," came a voice trying too hard to sound authoritative. Sheriff Cooper had approached without Samuel hearing him, a fact that annoyed the old lawman more than it should have. "Sheriff," Samuel acknowledged with a slight nod. "James." "Cooper, just getting to know the locals." He extended a hand that Samuel reluctantly shook. "You've got a place outside town, I hear." "Small horse ranch. 5 years now." The lie came easily, better than explaining 15 years of deliberate anonymity. Cooper studied him with curious eyes. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" "Doubt it," Samuel replied evenly. "Just got an ordinary face, I reckon." The sheriff seemed about to say more when a commotion erupted from the telegraph office. The operator, a thin man named Perkins, rushed out waving a yellow paper. "Sheriff just came through," he shouted. "Details on those Yuma escapees." Cooper hurried over, followed by several townspeople gathering to hear the news. Samuel remained by the livery, but angled himself too. "Listen, 5 men," Cooper read aloud, "led by William Blackjack Morgan. Others are Pete Rawlins, brothers Eli and Jesse Tanner, and Frank Jenkins, all armed and extremely dangerous. Last seen heading northeast toward Arizona territory." Samuel's jaw tightened. He knew those names. He'd arrested Morgan and Jenkins himself years ago. The Tanner brothers had been part of the notorious Clayton gang before going their separate ways. "They've killed 2 guards and a family of settlers already," Cooper continued, his voice betraying his nervousness. "Territorial. Authorities advise all communities to form militia and prepare defenses." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dusty Creek had never faced such a threat. The town was too small, too insignificant for most trouble to find it. "Now, folks, don't panic," Cooper said with forced confidence. "I've dealt with dangerous men before." The tremor in his voice suggested otherwise. Samuel turned away, a coldness settling in his gut. He knew exactly what men like Blackjack Morgan did to small, unprepared towns. He'd seen the aftermath too many times. "You're mighty quiet, Sam," Martha said, appearing beside him. "Thinking about those wanted posters you used to hang?" "Those days are gone," he muttered. "Maybe," she replied, "but those men aren't." That evening, Samuel sat on his cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Thunder grazed nearby, occasionally raising his head as if sensing his master's unease. From his rocking chair, Samuel could see clear across the valley where the main trail wound toward Dusty Creek. No dust clouds yet, no sign of riders. But something in his bones, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 20 years of manhunts and shootouts, told him trouble was coming. Just not my concern anymore, he whispered to himself, his voice lacking conviction. The town. Blacksmith Abe Johnson rode up as darkness fell. A beefy man with forearms like hams, Abe had become Samuel's closest thing to a friend, though he knew nothing of the old cowboy's past. "Evening, Sam," Abe called, dismounting. "Thought you should know. Sheriff's called a town meeting tomorrow. Talking about forming a militia." He chuckled. "Boy looks scared out of his boots." Samuel nodded. "He should be." "You ever handle a gun?" "Much, Sam?" Abe asked. "Town could use men who know which end the bullet comes out of." Samuel almost smiled. "Done some hunting in my day." "Well, meeting's at noon if you're interested. Figure I might volunteer, though my aim ain't worth spit past 20 paces. After Abe left, Samuel remained on the porch long after night fell. Stars emerged above, the same stars he'd navigated by while tracking men across unforgiving wilderness. Finally, he went inside and lit a lantern. From a shelf, he took down a battered copy of Shakespeare's collected works, a gift from a governor whose daughter Samuel had rescued from Comanche raiders. Between its pages was a newspaper clipping, yellowed, with age. "Marshall's steady hand. Hawkins brings justice to Silverton," the headline read, but there was no mention of the boy. No mention of the stray bullet that had torn through an innocent child when the outlaw had used him as a shield. No mention of how Samuel had laid down his badge that very day, walking away from everything he'd built. He returned the book to its shelf, the memories sharper than they'd been in years. Tomorrow, the town would meet to discuss defense against killers. And Samuel Hawkins would stay right here, where the ghosts of his past couldn't find him, or so he told himself. Samuel's sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of gunfire and a child's cry. He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat despite the cool mountain air. He was splitting firewood when he heard it, the distant thunder of hooves, not coming from the direction of town, but from the old trail that skirted his property. Samuel set his axe down, listening carefully. 5 riders, moving at a steady pace but not in a hurry. Not a posse, which would ride harder. Not casual travelers, either, not on that seldom-used trail. Samuel moved silently to the side of his cabin, where climbing roses obscured the small window that faced the trail. He peered through the leaves just as the riders came into view. They were dusty, hard-faced men, with the wary alertness of predators. 3 were younger, 30s perhaps, while 2 were older, with grey in their beards. All were heavily armed. One of the younger ones had prison-made tattoos visible on his forearms. Samuel recognized 2 of them instantly, despite the years. Blackjack Morgan rode in front, his black hat pulled low. The man still had the military bearing that had made him a feared cavalry officer before he'd turned to robbery and murder. Behind him rode Frank Jenkins, thinner and grayer than when Samuel had arrested him, but with the same cold eyes that had watched while he'd tortured a stage driver for the location of a strongbox. Samuel's breath caught. The Yuma escapees were here, right outside his property. He watched as they rode past his gate, not even glancing toward his cabin. They continued for another quarter-mile before reaching the old Turner place, abandoned for 2 years since its owner had died of influenza. The group dismounted and led their horses into the dilapidated barn. Samuel returned to his woodpile, mind racing. The Turner cabin overlooked the main road into Dusty Creek. It was the perfect place to watch who came and went without being seen, or to plan an ambush. By midday, when the town meeting was set to begin, Samuel had made his decision. He wouldn't go into town. Instead, he saddled Thunder and rode away from Dusty Creek, circling around through the hills until he could approach the Turner place from the rear, using the pine forest as cover. He left Thunder secured in a stand of trees and proceeded on foot, moving with a stealth that belied his age. Years might have passed, but the skills of tracking and stalking came back as if he'd never stopped using them. From the cover of a boulder-strewn rise, Samuel observed the cabin. 2 men stood watch, one on the decaying porch and another on the barn roof, giving them views in all directions. The others were presumably inside. Samuel settled into watch, drawing on years of patience built during stakeouts. 3 hours passed before he saw movement. Blackjack Morgan emerged from the cabin with another man, one of the Tanner brothers, Samuel guessed, and spread a crude map on an upturned barrel. They were too far for Samuel to hear, but their gestures told the story. Blackjack pointed repeatedly toward town, then traced what appeared to be an escape route heading west. The Tanner brother nodded, making his own marks on the map. After they returned inside, Samuel worked his way closer, using every scrap of cover. The afternoon was fading when he reached a position behind the barn. Through gaps in the weathered boards, he could make out their horses, good stock, probably stolen during their escape, and something else that made his blood run cold. Rifles. Lots of them. Not just the usual Winchester repeaters, but military-issue Springfield rifles, at least a dozen, still in crates. That kind of firepower could cut down half the town before anyone could return fire. The sound of approaching hoofbeats sent Samuel back into cover. A lone rider approached from the direction of town, the youngest of the escapees, returning from what must have been a reconnaissance mission. The group gathered around him as he dismounted. This time, Samuel was close enough to hear. "Towns. A joke," the young outlaw reported. "One sheriff looks greener than spring grass, no deputies, general store, saloon, bank's just a big safe in the back of the assayer's office." "Any soldiers?" Blackjack asked. "None. Nearest fort's 3 days' ride." Blackjack's voice was cold and methodical. "Gold shipment arrives in 4 days. Payroll for the Blue Sky mine. They'll bring it by stage, transfer it to the assayer's office. Town that size, minimal security." "What about that militia they're forming?" asked another voice. 6 farmers with squirrel guns," the scout laughed. "Most ain't fired a shot except to hunt rabbits." "Once we hit the payroll, we head west," Blackjack continued, "through the high pass, then south toward Mexico. Army won't even know which direction to search." Samuel had heard enough. Carefully, he retreated to where Thunder waited. The sky was darkening as he mounted up and took a circuitous route back to his cabin. His mind worked through what he'd learned. The escaped convicts weren't just passing through. They were planning to rob the mine payroll, which meant they'd be here for at least 4 days. And with those rifles, they wouldn't hesitate to cut down anyone who stood in their way. As he approached his cabin in the gathering darkness, Samuel noticed something wrong. His front door stood ajar, lantern light spilling out. He dismounted, dropped Thunder's reins, and moved silently to the side window. Inside, 2 men were rummaging through his meager possessions. He recognized them as the Tanner brothers, part of Blackjack's gang. "Nothing worth taking," one grunted, kicking over a chair. "Check the stable," the other said. "Old man might have decent horses." Samuel faded into the shadows as they exited, watching as they headed toward his small stable where his other horses were kept. His hand instinctively reached for a sidearm that wasn't there, hadn't been there for 15 years. He circled around through the trees, reaching the rear of his cabin unseen. The Tanner brothers were still in the stable when Samuel slipped inside his home. Everything had been tossed, furniture overturned, his few books scattered. They'd been looking for valuables, not realizing that an old horsebreaker had little worth stealing. Except they hadn't found the loose floorboard in the corner, hadn't discovered what lay beneath. Samuel stood motionless, listening to the men curse as they examined his horses. Soon they'd return, perhaps decide to burn his cabin out of spite. The decision he'd avoided for 15 years now stared him in the face. Samuel slipped back out of the cabin before the Tanner brothers returned from the stable. Much as his instincts screamed to confront them, the tactician in him knew better. 2 against 1, with them armed and him empty-handed, were poor odds, even in his prime. Instead, he melted into the tree line, circling through the pines until he reached the small rise behind his property. From there, he watched as the brothers emerged from his stable, leading his best mare. "Blackjack will like this one," the taller Tanner said, stroking the horse's neck. "Fine bloodline." "Should we burn the place?" the other asked, gesturing toward the cabin. "Nah, Blackjack wants to keep things quiet. Besides, might be useful to have a base away from the main cabin." Samuel remained motionless as they mounted up, one on his stolen mare, and rode back toward the Turner place. Only after they disappeared from sight did he return to his ransacked home. He didn't bother righting the overturned furniture or gathering his scattered possessions. Instead, he went straight to the loose floorboard in the corner. It remained undisturbed, his past still safely hidden beneath. Samuel replaced the board without opening the box. Not yet. Dawn found him sitting on his porch, a Winchester repeating rifle across his lap. Not his preferred weapon, but effective enough at medium range. He'd spent the night considering his options. Warning the town seemed the obvious choice, but that would mean revealing how he knew about Blackjack's plan, and risk exposing who he really was. He was still deliberating when he spotted a rider approaching from the direction of the Turner place. Samuel recognized the scout from yesterday, the youngest of the escaped convicts. The man rode boldly up to Samuel's gate, as if paying a neighborly visit. "Morning, old-timer," he called, his friendly tone belied by cold eyes that missed nothing. "Name's Pete Rollins." Samuel nodded without speaking, the rifle casual but visible across his knees. "Saw you had a nice little spread here," Rollins continued. "Me and my friends are staying up at the old place yonder." He hooked a thumb toward the Turner cabin. "Doing some prospecting." "That's so," Samuel replied flatly. Rollins dismounted and leaned against the gatepost. "Thought I'd be neighborly. Introduce myself." His hand rested casually near his holstered revolver. "Didn't catch your name?" "Samuel," he answered, intentionally leaving off his surname. "Just passing through myself. Rented this place to break some horses. That there's a fine rifle." Rollins nodded toward the Winchester. "Man your age still hunts. Man my age has to eat," Samuel replied. He stood slowly, keeping the rifle pointed downward but ready. "Now, if you don't mind, got chores to tend to." Rollins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sure thing. Just wanted to let you know we're around. Might be we'll have a business proposition for a man who knows horses." Samuel watched him ride away, reading the threats beneath the cordial words. They were establishing their presence, letting him know they'd be watching. The message was clear: stay out of their way, or there'd be consequences. By mid-morning, Samuel had made his decision. He saddled Thunder and rode toward town, the Winchester secured in his saddle scabbard. The town meeting would be starting soon, and while he had no intention of volunteering for any militia, he needed to gauge how prepared, or unprepared, Dusty Creek might be. The town was buzzing when he arrived. Nearly every resident had turned out for the meeting, cramming into the small building that served as both church and town hall. Samuel slipped in quietly, taking a position at the back where he could observe without drawing attention. Sheriff Cooper stood at the front, trying to project confidence, but looking like a boy in his father's clothes. Beside him, Mayor Willard, a former merchant with more ambition than sense, addressed the crowd. "Now, folks, Sheriff Cooper here has experience with law enforcement back east, and he's going to outline our defense strategy." Cooper stepped forward, clearing his throat. "The telegram confirms 5 dangerous escaped convicts may be headed this way. I'm forming a citizens' militia to supplement law enforcement." A murmur ran through the crowd. "The gold shipment for the Blue Sky mine is due in 4 days," Cooper continued. "That could be a target. We'll need armed men to stand watch at key points around town." Samuel stiffened. The sheriff had just announced the very information Blackjack Morgan was planning to exploit. Every person in this room now knew about the payroll shipment. And there was no telling who might talk loosely at the saloon or general store where Morgan's men could overhear. "I need volunteers," Cooper was saying. "Men with shooting experience preferred." Hands went up around the room. The blacksmith, several ranchers, the barber who claimed to have been a sharpshooter in the war. Samuel kept his own hands firmly at his sides. As the meeting broke up, Martha found him near the door. "Not volunteering." "Sam?" she asked quietly. "Not my fight," he replied. "Saw you rode in with a rifle today," she observed. "Not your usual style." "Had some vermin around the place," Samuel said, then lowered his voice. "Listen, Martha, those convicts Cooper's worried about. They're already here." Her eyes widened. "You've seen them, staying at the old Turner place, scouting the town, and they're planning exactly what the sheriff just announced to everyone, hitting that gold shipment. You need to tell Cooper," she urged. "And say what? That I spied on them, that I recognized Blackjack Morgan because I arrested him 12 years ago?" Martha studied him. "Then what are you going to do?" "Nothing," Samuel replied, but the word tasted like a lie. "Just thought someone should know the truth, in case it all goes wrong," she finished for him. "Samuel Hawkins, you're a stubborn old fool." "Just an old horsebreaker, Martha. Nothing more." He left her standing there and was untying Thunder when Sheriff Cooper approached. "Mr. Hawkins, isn't it? Noticed you didn't volunteer." "Bad shoulder," Samuel lied. "Old injury, can't shoot straight anymore." Cooper seemed about to say more when one of the townsmen called him away. Samuel mounted up and headed back to his cabin, a heaviness settling in his chest that had nothing to do with age. As he crested the rise that gave a view of his property, he pulled Thunder to a halt. 3 riders were visible near his cabin, Blackjack Morgan himself, flanked by the Tanner brothers. They seemed to be waiting for him. Samuel took a deep breath, then nudged Thunder forward. Time to see just how convincing his harmless old man act could be. The rain had just begun to fall that day in Silverton. Samuel remembered the way it darkened the dusty street, the way it drummed on the boardwalk as he faced down Jeb Harker, the last of the notorious Harker gang. 4 brothers, all wanted for. Murder and robbery across 3 territories, and Samuel had tracked them for weeks. 3 were already dead or captured. Only Jeb remained, cornered outside the Silverton bank, his gun drawn. "It's over, Harker," Samuel had called, standing 20 paces away, his twin Colts still holstered, always giving a man the chance to surrender, to face justice rather than a bullet. Harker's eyes had darted wildly, looking for escape. "Not yet, Marshal," he'd snarled, and lunged toward a young boy who'd wandered onto the street, oblivious to the danger. Samuel's draw had been lightning fast, his shot aimed to wound, not kill. But Harker had yanked the child in front of him just as Samuel fired. The boy had stumbled, fallen, and Harker had run, escaping in the confusion. Samuel never pursued him. Instead, he'd knelt in the rain-soaked dirt, cradling the dying child as blood spread across the boy's small chest. He'd seen the life fade from those innocent eyes, heard the mother's scream when she pushed through the gathering crowd. He'd laid his badge on the boy's body and walked away, never to wear a lawman's star again. Now, 15 years later, Samuel rode toward his cabin where Blackjack Morgan waited. The rain had started again, a light drizzle that seemed fitting for the memories that haunted him. "Afternoon," Blackjack called as Samuel approached. "Hope you don't mind us waiting on your property." Samuel drew Thunder to a halt. At this distance, perhaps 30 feet, the man hadn't changed much, still broad-shouldered with that military bearing and eyes that seemed to assess everything as a potential threat or advantage. The grey in his beard was new, as were the lines around his eyes, but the cold calculation remained unchanged. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Samuel asked mildly, keeping his hand well away from the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "Pete Rawlins says, you're a horseman." Blackjack dismounted, approaching with the confidence of someone used to intimidating others. "I admire good horseflesh myself. Military training." "That's so," Samuel replied non-committally, though he knew very well that Morgan had been a cavalry officer before turning outlaw. It was what had made him so dangerous, tactical thinking combined with criminal intent. "Your mare's got excellent lines," Blackjack continued, patting the stolen horse that one of the Tanner brothers held. "Thought we might discuss purchasing her." "Not for sale," Samuel said, dismounting slowly, playing the role of a cautious but not frightened old man. "Everything's for sale," Blackjack smiled without warmth, "for the right price." Samuel recognized the threat behind the words. He'd heard similar offers from countless outlaws over the years: accept our terms or suffer the consequences. "Well, now," Samuel said, feigning consideration. "Horse like that, I'd need at least $50. The Tanner brothers snickered, but Blackjack's expression remained unchanged. "50 it is," he said, reaching into his coat pocket and withdrawing a money clip. He counted out the bills and held them out. Samuel was genuinely surprised. He'd expected threats, not payment. He took the money slowly, recognizing the tactic. Blackjack was establishing a relationship, making himself seem reasonable, a wolf wearing a sheepdog's clothing. "Appreciate the business," Samuel said. "Don't get many visitors out this way." "We'll be around a few days," Blackjack replied. "Doing some prospecting." His eyes scanned Samuel's face, looking for any sign of suspicion or recognition. "In fact, we might need supplies. Willing to pay fair prices, of course." "Town's got a good general store," Samuel suggested, gesturing toward Dusty Creek. "Rather keep to ourselves," Blackjack countered. "Less complicated that way. Figure you might pick up what we need next time you're in town. We'd make it worth your while." Samuel nodded slowly, as if considering a legitimate business proposition. "Might be able to do that." Blackjack smiled, a predator's smile that never reached his eyes. "Glad to hear it. We'll draw up a list." He gestured, and one of the Tanner brothers handed him a folded paper. Just the basics: flour, coffee, ammunition, nothing unusual. Samuel took the list, noting the substantial ammunition request, enough to fight a small war or massacre a town. "You must be planning to do a lot of hunting," he remarked. "Always." "Good to be prepared," Blackjack replied, his gaze hardening slightly. "Never know what you might encounter in these parts." They mounted their horses, Blackjack now astride Samuel's stolen mare. "We'll stop by tomorrow for those supplies," he said. It wasn't a request. Samuel watched them ride away, the list clutched in his hand. Blackjack Morgan was playing a careful game, establishing a presence near town, gathering intelligence, preparing for the payroll robbery while maintaining a cover of legitimacy. And now he was involving Samuel, creating a connection that would make it harder for the old lawman to act against them without exposing himself. Once they were out of sight, Samuel entered his cabin and finally lifted the loose floorboard. The cedar box lay undisturbed where he'd hidden it 15 years ago. He brushed away the dust and opened the lid. The twin Colt revolvers gleamed in the dim light, their ivory handles yellowed with age but still bearing the notches he'd carved, one for each man he'd been forced to kill in the line of duty. Beside them lay his marshal's badge, tarnished but unmistakable. Samuel lifted one of the revolvers, feeling its familiar weight. His hand didn't tremble as he checked the cylinder, empty as he'd left it. He set the gun down without loading it and closed the box, but this time he didn't return it to its hiding place. Instead, he placed it on the table and began cleaning his rifle. He still had no intention of strapping on those revolvers again. But Blackjack Morgan and his gang presented a problem that couldn't be ignored, not if he wanted to live with what remained of his conscience. That evening, as darkness fell, Samuel heard the approach of horses. He stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand, only to recognize Abe Johnson's massive frame. "Evening, Sam," the blacksmith called. "Sheriff sent me to check on you, make sure you're all right. Some of us are riding patrol, keeping an eye out for those escaped prisoners." "I'm fine," Samuel replied. "Haven't seen any sign of trouble." The lie came easily, but it left a bitter taste. Well, sheriff's got men watching the roads. Figured those convicts might try to hole up somewhere isolated. Abe looked around nervously. "You should probably keep that rifle handy, just in case." "I intend to," Samuel assured him. After Abe left, Samuel remained on the porch, watching the stars emerge above the distant mountains. Blackjack Morgan was cunning, using Samuel as an unwitting supplier while preparing to rob and likely murder the people of Dusty Creek. And Samuel had just lied to protect the outlaw's location. Why? Because revealing them meant revealing himself, or was it because he knew Sheriff Cooper and his hastily assembled militia wouldn't stand a chance against Blackjack's well-armed, experienced killers? Samuel had no illusions about his own abilities. He was no longer the lightning-fast lawman of legend. His reflexes had slowed with age. His eyesight wasn't what it once was. But he still knew how to track, how to plan, how to outsmart a criminal. He returned inside and opened the cedar box again, this time removing not the revolvers, but a small leather pouch tucked beneath them. From it, he withdrew a sharpening stone and a slender knife he'd once used to silently disable sentries when stealth was required. Some skills never faded entirely. Some instincts remained, no matter how deeply buried. Tomorrow, Blackjack Morgan expected him to deliver supplies. Tomorrow, Samuel would get a closer look at their operation, assess their strengths and weaknesses. Tomorrow, he would begin gathering the information needed to protect Dusty Creek without ever putting on the badge again. He slipped the knife into his boot and finally allowed himself to load the Winchester rifle. One step at a time, one decision at a time. The ghost of a boy in Silverton seemed to watch from the shadows, waiting to see if his death would finally be redeemed. Samuel rode into Dusty Creek the next morning with the outlaw's supply list tucked in his pocket. Martha gave him a sharp look when he entered the general store. "Need a few things," he said, handing her the list. "Running low on supplies." Martha scanned the paper, noting the quantities. "Quite a stock-up." "Just being prepared," Samuel replied. While Martha gathered the items, Samuel positioned himself near Sheriff Cooper, who was examining ammunition. "Getting ready for trouble, Sheriff?" Samuel asked quietly. Cooper straightened. "Just precautions. 4 deputies so far, but none with much experience." He checked that no one was listening. "Between you and me, I'm worried they might be more danger to themselves than any outlaws." As he paid for the supplies, Martha slipped a note into his palm. Outside, Samuel read it. "Be careful. Tonight." On his return, Samuel found Rawlins waiting. "At his cabin." "Took your time," the young outlaw commented, helping unload supplies. "Busy day in town," Samuel responded. "Sheriff's got everyone worked up about some prison break." Rawlins' eyes narrowed. "Town forming a militia?" "Trying to," Samuel said dismissively. 4 deputies who look like they've never fired a gun in anger." As they finished, Rawlins delivered his message. "Blackjack says to invite you for supper tonight. Show his appreciation." "Not necessary." "Wasn't asking," Rawlins cut in, his friendly tone evaporating. "Sundown, don't make us come fetch you." That evening, Samuel rode to the Turner place with his Winchester and the hidden knife in his boot. Inside, all 5 escaped convicts watched him with predatory eyes. "Mr. Hawkins," Blackjack greeted him with false warmth. "Appreciate you fetching. Are those supplies?" Frank Jenkins studied Samuel with particular intensity. "You look familiar, old man," he said suddenly. "Ever been to Yuma?" Samuel shook his head. "Spent most of my time up Montana way." Blackjack interrupted. You mentioned a gold shipment. When exactly is that due? 3 days now. Payroll for the Blue Sky mine. Big shipment? Blackjack asked, too casually. Don't rightly know, but they're worried enough to post guards. As the meal concluded, Eli Tanner returned from patrol, tossing a wrinkled paper onto the table. Found this by the South Ridge, he announced. Samuel's heart nearly stopped. It was a wanted poster with his own face, 20 years younger but recognizable. Wanted U.S. Marshal Samuel Hawkins, the text read. Reward for information leading to his location. Blackjack studied it with a frown. Marshal Hawkins. Disappeared. 1858 after the Silverton incident. Presumed dead. He looked up at Samuel. Interesting find. Samuel shrugged. Lots of old paper blowing around these parts. Jenkins was staring at the poster, then at Samuel, his expression darkening. Wait a minute. But Blackjack silenced him with a look. Our guest was just leaving, he said smoothly. Outside, Samuel mounted thunder, aware of the outlaws watching from the cabin. The wanted poster had raised suspicions, but not certainty. Not yet. As he rode home through darkness, Samuel knew his time was running short. Soon he would have to choose, warn the town and reveal himself, or continue this dangerous charade. Either way, the past he'd buried was clawing its way to the surface. Samuel rode toward town under a sky heavy with thunderclouds, his mind as turbulent as the coming storm. The wanted poster had changed everything. Jenkins was suspicious, and Blackjack, with his calculating intelligence, wouldn't ignore those suspicions. He'd spent the night considering his options. Warning the sheriff seemed the only honorable choice, but it meant risking exposure. If word got back to Blackjack that Samuel had betrayed them, retribution would be swift and merciless. Martha was waiting when he arrived at the general store, flipping the closed sign as he entered. They're here, aren't they? She asked without preamble. The Yuma escapees. Samuel nodded. At the Turner place, planning to hit the mine payroll. You need to tell the sheriff. And explain how I know? How I recognized Blackjack Morgan and Frank Jenkins? Samuel shook his head. They found an old wanted poster with my face on it, Martha. It won't take much for them to put it together. Martha's expression hardened. So what's your plan? Hide in your cabin while they rob and murder their way through town? Her words stung because they struck at the heart of his conflict. 15 years of anonymity, of running from his past, had become a habit hard to break. I don't know yet, he admitted. The Samuel Hawkins I read about wouldn't hesitate, she said quietly. That man died in Silverton, Samuel replied, but even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow. The bell above the door jingled as Sheriff Cooper entered, looking surprised to find the store closed. Mr. Hawkins, Mrs. Wilson. He nodded to them, both. Something wrong. Martha looked expectantly at Samuel, who hesitated only a moment. Sheriff, there's something you should know. Those escaped prisoners you're worried about, they're already here. Cooper's hand instinctively moved toward his revolver. Where? Old Turner place. All 5 of them. They're planning to hit the mine payroll when it arrives. How do you know this? Cooper demanded, his young face suddenly alert. I've had contact with them, Samuel said carefully. They think I'm just an old man, harmless. They've had me buying supplies in town for them. And you didn't report this immediately? Cooper's voice rose with indignation. That's aiding and abetting, Mr. Hawkins. I'm reporting it now, Samuel replied evenly, and I'm telling you they're dangerous men with military-grade weapons. Your 4 deputies won't stand a chance against them in a direct confrontation. Cooper paced the small store, agitation evident in every step. I need to organize the militia, send a telegraph to the territorial marshal. You do that, and you'll spook them, Samuel interrupted. Blackjack Morgan is a former cavalry officer. He has scouts watching the town. If he sees unusual activity, he'll either strike early or disappear. Blackjack Morgan? Cooper stopped pacing. You know these men by name? Martha intervened smoothly. Samuel's been around a long time, Sheriff. Recognizes the descriptions from old wanted posters. Cooper seemed to accept this, though his suspicion lingered. What would you suggest then, since you're so familiar with these types? Samuel considered his response carefully. Keep your preparations quiet. Position your men discreetly. And when the payroll arrives, be ready for anything. These aren't common bandits. They're killers who won't hesitate to gun down anyone in their way. I'll need more men, Cooper muttered, more to himself than to them. Quality matters more than quantity, Samuel replied. One good man in the right position is worth 10 amateurs shooting wildly. Cooper studied Samuel with new interest. You seem to know a lot about tactical positioning for a horsebreaker. Picked up a few things over the years, Samuel said vaguely. Fought in the war like many men my age. The sheriff nodded, apparently satisfied. I appreciate the warning, Mr. Hawkins. I'll keep it discreet. He turned to leave, then paused. These men think you're working with them? They do. Then perhaps you should continue to let them think that. You could be our eyes inside their operation. The request caught Samuel off guard. That's a dangerous game, Sheriff. These are dangerous times, Cooper replied, suddenly looking older than his years. I'll expect reports from you whenever possible, without raising their suspicions of... Of course, after Cooper left, Martha turned to Samuel. So now you're a spy for the law again. How does it feel? Familiar, Samuel admitted, and that's what worries me. He rode back to his cabin with a sense of foreboding. He'd chosen a side now, and there would be no going back. If Blackjack discovered his betrayal, Samuel had no illusions about his fate. As he approached his property, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something was wrong. The door to his cabin stood slightly ajar, though he'd closed it securely before leaving. Samuel dismounted quietly and approached from the side, Winchester ready. Through the window, he could see the interior had been ransacked again, more thoroughly this time. Furniture overturned, floorboards pried up, including the one that had hidden his cedar box. The box itself lay open on the table, empty. A cold dread washed over him. His revolvers were gone. His marshal's badge was gone. All evidence of his true identity had been taken. On the wall, someone had used a knife to pin the wanted poster, the same one from the Turner place, now with crude markings defacing the image. The message was clear. They knew. Samuel backed away from the cabin, senses alert for an ambush. But the property seemed deserted. They'd taken what they wanted and left. He mounted Thunder quickly, understanding the danger. Blackjack wouldn't. Just kill him now. He'd want to make an example of the former lawman who tried to deceive them. As he rode toward town, raindrops began to fall, the coming storm finally breaking. He had to warn Cooper, warn Martha. Blackjack now had a personal vendetta on top of his planned robbery, making him even more dangerous. The storm was building, both the one in the sky and the one Samuel had been avoiding for 15 years. There would be no more running. No more hiding behind a fabricated identity. Blackjack Morgan had forced his hand. Now, ready or not, Samuel Hawkins, the real Samuel Hawkins, would have to stand and fight. Rain pounded against the jailhouse windows as Samuel finished briefing Sheriff Cooper. The young lawman's face had grown increasingly pale as Samuel revealed his true identity and the full extent of the danger facing Dusty Creek. You're telling me you're the Marshal Hawkins, Cooper repeated, incredulous. The one they called Steady Hand. Was, Samuel corrected. That was a lifetime ago. And now Blackjack Morgan knows who you are, Cooper said, pacing the small office. And has your guns. My identity is the least of our concerns, Samuel replied. Morgan's plan was always to hit the payroll shipment, but now he'll be out for blood too. He'll want to make an example of me, and he won't care who gets hurt in the process. A flash of lightning illuminated the sheriff's troubled face. "We should evacuate the town." "No time," Samuel said, shaking his head. "The payroll arrives tomorrow, and Morgan's men are watching every move. Start an evacuation now, and they'll strike immediately." "Then what do you suggest, Marshal?" Cooper asked, the title coming uncertainly. Samuel grimaced at the long-abandoned honorific. "I'm not a marshal anymore, but I do know how men like Morgan think. He'll want to make a statement, something public and brutal. We need to use that against him." Their planning session was interrupted by shouts from the street. Cooper drew his revolver and moved to the window. "God Almighty," he whispered. Samuel joined him, peering into the rain-soaked darkness. A horse was trotting down the middle of the street, its rider slumped forward, clearly injured. As it passed beneath a lantern, Samuel recognized the distinctive paint coloring of the Wilson Ranch foreman's mount. Cooper rushed outside, Samuel close behind. They reached the horse just as the rider, John Wilson, Martha's youngest brother, slid from the saddle. His shirt was dark with blood. "Sheriff!" he gasped as Cooper caught him. They came, burned. The South outbuilding took all the horses. "Who did, John?" Cooper demanded, though they all knew the answer. 5 men. One called the others by name. Blackjack. Wilson coughed, blood speckling his lips. "Said to deliver a message. To Marshal Hawkins." Samuel stepped forward, rain streaming down his face. "What message?" Wilson's eyes widened slightly with recognition despite his pain. "Said to tell you, this is just the beginning. Said everyone in town will suffer for harboring a lawman." He coughed again, more violently. "Shot me. Left me for dead." Cooper and Samuel carried Wilson to the doctor's office, where the town's elderly physician took charge with grim efficiency. "He's lucky to be alive," Dr. Bennett said after examining the wound. "Bullet missed his vital organs, but he's lost a lot of blood." Outside the doctor's office, Cooper turned to Samuel. "This changes things. They're attacking outlying farms now." "It's a message," Samuel agreed, "but also a test. They're watching to see how we respond." Cooper's youthful face hardened with determination. "Then we'd better show them we're not intimidated." By morning, Dusty Creek had changed. Men with rifles patrolled the streets, shopkeepers barricaded windows, and families gathered in the central buildings for safety. The storm had passed, leaving puddles in the rutted streets, and a tension that hung heavy in the air. Samuel had spent the night at the jailhouse, helping Cooper organize the town's defenses. Word had spread quickly about his true identity, and he'd endured the stares of townspeople who'd known him only as the quiet horsebreaker. Martha found him on the jailhouse porch at dawn, her face tight with worry. "John's going to live," she said without preamble, "but those animals killed 2 of our ranch hands." "I'm sorry, Martha," Samuel replied, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "This is my fault. If I hadn't come here—" "Don't," she cut him off. "Morgan and his gang are the only ones to blame. You tried to outrun your past, Samuel, but it seems some things can't be outrun." The distant sound of hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. A rider was approaching from the east, from the direction of Samuel's cabin. "It's Pete Rawlins." Samuel recognized the youngest outlaw, now pulling his horse to a stop at the edge of town. Cooper emerged from the jailhouse, rifle in hand. "What's he doing?" "Delivering another message," Samuel said grimly. Rawlins raised a hand, signaling he meant no immediate harm. "Got a message for the town," he shouted, "and for Marshal Hawkins." Cooper raised his rifle. "You're talking to the law, mister. State your business and then clear out." Rawlins smiled coldly. "Blackjack Morgan sends his regards, says to tell you the old marshal's cabin made a fine bonfire." He fixed his gaze on Samuel. "He also says to tell Marshal Hawkins that his guns are being put to good use. Already used one to put down a rancher who resisted." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "One last thing," Rawlins continued. Blackjack says the town has a choice. Deliver the mine payroll and marshal Hawkins to the old crossing by noon tomorrow, or what happened at the Wilson Ranch will seem like a church picnic. He wheeled his horse around and galloped away before anyone could respond. We should have shot him, Cooper muttered, and start the bloodshed early? Samuel shook his head. He'll be reporting back on how many defenders he saw, their positions, their readiness. Cooper looked around at the armed townspeople. We're not much of a fighting force. No, Samuel agreed. But we have one advantage. They've made this personal. That means Blackjack is angry, and angry men make mistakes. By midday, Samuel had ridden out to survey the remains of his cabin. Nothing was left but smoldering timbers and ash. Thunder, his faithful stallion, was gone, either stolen or killed. As he sifted through the ruins, Samuel found a half-melted spur, the only remains of his former life. Everything else had been destroyed, a deliberate erasure of his existence. The sound of a horse approaching put him on alert, but it was only Abe Johnson, the blacksmith. Damn shame, Abe said, surveying the destruction. They're animals, all of them. Samuel nodded, still crouched among the ashes. They want me to know there's nowhere to hide, that everything I care about will be destroyed. Town's behind you, Abe assured him. Word spread about who you really are. Folks are saying if steady hand Hawkins is with us, we might stand a chance. Samuel looked up sharply. Don't put too much faith in old legends, Abe. I haven't worn a badge or fired those guns in 15 years. Maybe not, Abe conceded, but some things don't rust with disuse. Courage, determination, the will to protect the innocent. He dismounted with surprising grace for a man his size. I brought you something. From his saddlebag, Abe withdrew a holster and gun belt. It's not fancy like those matched Colts Morgan took, but it'll shoot straight. And there's this. He handed Samuel a badge, not a U.S. Marshal's star, but a simple sheriff's deputy badge. Cooper asked me to bring it, said he could use an experienced hand. Samuel stared at the offered items, the weight of the moment not lost on him. Taking them meant stepping back into a life he'd abandoned, accepting a responsibility he'd once found too heavy to bear. I buried that life for a reason, Abe, he said quietly. Last time I wore a badge, an innocent boy died because of my bullet. And if you don't wear this one now, how many innocents might die? Abe countered. Sometimes the past needs burying, other times it needs facing. After a long moment, Samuel reached out and took the gun belt, then the badge. The metal felt cool and familiar against his palm, like greeting an old friend or perhaps an old enemy. Tell Cooper I'll be there by sundown, he said. We've got plans to make. As Abe rode away, Samuel buckled on the gun belt and tested its weight. The revolver wasn't his custom Colt, but it would serve. He didn't pin on the badge yet. That final step would wait until he returned to town. Standing in the ashes of his peaceful existence, Samuel Hawkins made the decision he'd been avoiding for 15 years. There would be no more running, no more hiding. Blackjack Morgan had crossed a line, threatening innocent people in a personal vendetta. Now he would face what generations of outlaws had feared, a lawman who never missed, never gave up, and never flinched from doing what was necessary. Samuel mounted Abe's spare horse and rode toward town, leaving the smoldering ruins of his old life behind. By sundown, Marshal Hawkins would return, for one last stand against the darkness that threatened. Dusty Creek transformed overnight into an armed camp. Barricades rose at intersections, women melted household items for bullets, and men practiced shooting under Samuel's guidance. Payroll stage arrives tomorrow, Cooper told Samuel privately. No word from the territorial marshal. We're on our own. Morgan's watching the telegraph office, Samuel replied. We'll make him come to us, set up here, here, and here. He marked positions on their crude map. Create a killing ground. Cooper frowned. That leaves the assayer's office exposed. Exactly. Make him think he's winning, then close the trap. As dusk approached, a commotion erupted near the saloon. A bloodied rider from the Wilson Ranch had arrived with news. "They're coming," the man gasped. "They've got prisoners. The Paulson family, using them as shields. Said to tell you they'll be in town by midnight." Samuel gathered the town's defenders in the church and outlined a new plan. "Morgan's coming tonight with hostages. We can't risk crossfire hitting innocent people." "So what do we do?" someone called out. "Morgan thinks the payroll is already here," Samuel explained. "We'll use that. I need 5 volunteers, good shots who can keep their nerve." More hands rose than expected. Samuel chose carefully: Abe Johnson, Mike from the livery, and 3 skilled ranchers. "Everyone else, clear the streets. Make the town look abandoned." As the meeting disbanded, Cooper confronted Samuel. "You're using yourself as bait." "I'm ending this," Samuel replied firmly, "one way or another." By midnight, Dusty Creek was eerily quiet. Samuel waited alone in the assayer's office, the deputy's badge still unpinned on the desk beside a borrowed revolver. Hoofbeats broke the silence. Through the window, Samuel watched Blackjack Morgan ride in with his men. The Paulson family, 5 of them, not 4, were bound on horses surrounded by the escaped convicts. Morgan himself wore Samuel's twin Colts prominently at his waist. "Marshal Hawkins," Morgan shouted, "come out and face me or watch this family die." Samuel stepped onto the boardwalk, deliberately unarmed. "Let the family go," he called. "This is between you and me." Morgan grinned. The legendary steady hand Hawkins. He drew one of the Colts and aimed it at the youngest Paulson child. "15 years ago you put me away. I swore I'd make you pay." "Let the innocents go," Samuel repeated calmly. "Maybe after you watch them die. Starting with the youngest, just like that boy in Silverton." The mention struck Samuel like a physical blow. "That was an accident." "Was it?" Morgan's smile widened. "I've had 12 years to learn things, Marshal. Like how the great Hawkins disappeared after killing a child. What are you saying? It wasn't your bullet that killed that boy in Silverton." Morgan's voice dripped satisfaction. "Jeb Harker was my cousin. He told me how he shot that boy deliberately, knowing you'd blame yourself." Samuel felt the ground shift beneath him. "You're saying Harker shot the boy, not me?" Morgan laughed. "Your bullet hit exactly where you aimed, but Harker had already put a round in the child. You just didn't see it." He shrugged. "Destroyed you more thoroughly than killing you ever could. 15 years of guilt crystallized into something harder, colder." Samuel's eyes rose to meet Morgan's, and something in that gaze made the outlaw's smile falter. "Thank you for telling me that," Samuel said quietly. "Now let the family go." "Or what? You're unarmed, old man." The shot came from behind Samuel. Morgan's hand jerked violently, the Colt spinning away. 20 feet back, Sheriff Cooper lowered a smoking rifle. "Now!" Samuel shouted. From rooftops and windows, rifles cracked, not at the outlaws, but at the ropes binding the Paulson family. One by one, the ropes snapped, cut by precision shots. "Get down!" Samuel commanded the family, who scrambled for cover. In a swift motion, Samuel grabbed a shotgun he'd hidden behind a barrel. "It's over, Blackjack. Tell your men to drop their guns." Most complied except Frank Jenkins. "I'm not going back to Yuma." His hand moved toward his holster. "Don't," Samuel warned, but Jenkins drew anyway. Samuel's shotgun boomed, throwing Jenkins from his horse. As the townspeople secured the prisoners, Morgan managed a hateful smile despite his wounded hand. "You've still got it, Marshal, but you'll always be the man who ran." Samuel stepped closer. "No, Blackjack, I'm the man who's taking you back to Yuma." Later, Martha approached him. "What Morgan said about Silverton, was it true?" Samuel looked toward the dawn, breaking on the horizon. "I don't know. But after 15 years, I finally know it's time to stop running from the question." He took the deputy's badge from his pocket and pinned it to his vest. Some ghosts could only be laid to rest by walking straight through them. Dawn painted Dusty Creek in pale gold as the townspeople emerged from hiding. Word spread quickly about the night's events, how Samuel had faced down Morgan, how the Paulson family had been rescued, how the old marshal had reclaimed his identity. The prisoners were secured in the jailhouse, all except Jenkins, whose body had been taken to the undertaker. Blackjack Morgan sat in the corner cell, his wounded hand wrapped in bloodied bandages, his eyes never leaving Samuel as he conferred with Cooper. "We still have a problem," Samuel said, keeping his voice low. "Morgan brought all his men into town. Their hideout at the Turner place is unguarded." "Why is that a problem?" Cooper asked. "We've got them all locked up." "My guns," Samuel replied. "My badge. Everything they took from my cabin. If they're at the Turner place, I want them back." Cooper nodded in understanding. "I can send men." "No," Samuel cut him off. "I'll go myself. This is personal." The sun had barely cleared the eastern mountains when Samuel rode out of town. On a borrowed horse, the deputy's badge gleamed on his vest, and the shotgun rested across his saddle, a far cry from the twin Colts that had been his trademark, but effective nonetheless. Martha had tried to dissuade him from going alone. "Morgan might have left men we don't know about," she'd warned, but Samuel knew better. Blackjack was many things, but he wasn't careless with information. If he'd had more men, they would have been part of the town raid. The Turner place stood silent as Samuel approached, no sign of life visible. He circled the cabin once, checking for any movement before dismounting and approaching the door, shotgun ready. The cabin's interior was in disarray, bedrolls scattered, empty bottles and food tins littering the floor, evidence of the outlaw's hasty departure the previous night. Samuel searched methodically, looking for any sign of his stolen possessions. He found nothing. Not his guns, not his badge, not any of the items taken from his destroyed cabin. Frustrated, Samuel checked the barn, finding only a nervous horse left behind in the outlaw's rush to town. The animal calmed at his gentle handling, and he recognized it as one stolen from the Wilson ranch. As he was about to leave, Samuel noticed fresh marks in the dirt floor, the kind made when something buried is recently disturbed. Setting down the shotgun, he knelt and began digging with his hands. 6 inches down, his fingers touched wood. Carefully, he uncovered a small box and lifted it from its shallow grave. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, he found his marshal's badge, tarnished but intact. But no guns. Morgan must have kept the Colts with him, wearing them as trophies. Samuel had seen them on the outlaw's hips during the confrontation, but in the chaos of the arrest, he hadn't noticed what happened to them afterward. Pinning the marshal's badge beside the deputy star, Samuel continued searching the cabin and outbuildings. In a hollow tree behind the barn, he discovered a canvas sack containing various stolen items, including Martha's silver locket taken during the Wilson Ranch raid. He was securing the recovered items to his saddle when he heard the approach of horses. Grabbing the shotgun, Samuel positioned himself behind the barn corner, ready for trouble. But it was Cooper who rode into view, accompanied by Abe Johnson. "Thought you might need help," the sheriff called, dismounting. "Found some stolen property," Samuel replied, "but not my guns. Morgan must have hidden them somewhere else." Abe cleared his throat awkwardly. "About that, Marshal, there's something you should know." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a familiar wooden box. "Found these when we were processing the prisoners. Morgan had them in his saddlebags." Samuel opened the box to find his twin Colts nestled inside, seemingly untouched. Relief washed over him, followed immediately by suspicion. Why would Morgan have kept them in their case? He was wearing them last night. "That's the strange part," Cooper said. "When we were locking him up, I noticed the guns he had weren't yours. They were similar, ivory-handled Colts, but not the same ones." Samuel examined his revolvers more carefully. They were indeed his, the ones he'd carried as a marshal. The notches on the handles matched his memory, as did the slight discoloration on the right grip, where a bullet had once grazed it. He had replicas made. Samuel realized aloud. Copies to wear while keeping the originals safe. "Man's obsessed with you," Abe observed. "Creating pairs of guns like yours, tracking you down after all these years. That's not just revenge. That's madness." Samuel holstered the revolvers, the familiar weight both comforting and unsettling after so many years. Madness or not, it ends today. Let's get back to town. The stage with the payroll will be arriving soon, and I want Morgan and his men well on their way to Yuma before it gets here. They were halfway back to Dusty Creek when they spotted the dust cloud, a rider approaching at full gallop from the direction of town. "Something's wrong," Cooper said, spurring his horse forward. The rider was Mike from the livery, his face pale with urgency. "Sheriff! Marshal! Thank God I found you!" he gasped, reining in his lathered horse. "It's Morgan! He's escaped!" Samuel felt his blood run cold. "How?" "Doc Bennett went to check his wounded hand," Mike explained between heaving breaths. "Morgan grabbed him, used him as a shield, got his hands on a gun. He's taken Martha as a hostage, said he's going to the assayer's office to wait for the payroll, says if anyone tries to stop him, he'll kill her." Cooper looked to Samuel, who had gone very still, his face hardening into a mask of determination. "How long ago?" Samuel asked, his voice deadly calm. 20 minutes, maybe less." Samuel checked his revolvers, confirming they were loaded after 15 years of disuse. The familiar weight in his hands brought back muscle memories he'd thought long forgotten. "Cooper, take Abe and Mike and circle around behind the assayer's office. No shooting unless you have a clear shot at Morgan. Martha's safety comes first." Samuel's voice had taken on the tone of command that had once made him legendary across the Western Territories. "I'll approach from the front. Morgan wants a showdown with Marshal Hawkins. He's about to get one." Without waiting for a response, Samuel spurred his horse toward town, riding harder than he had in years. The twin colts bounced against his thighs, and the dual badges, deputy and marshal, glinted in the morning sun. After 15 years of running from his past, Samuel Hawkins was riding straight toward it, guns ready and eyes clear. Blackjack. Morgan had wanted to face the legendary lawman one more time. He was about to get his wish. Dusty Creek's main street stood deserted when Samuel rode in. He dismounted a block from the assayer's office, moving silently to a position behind the general store. Through the front window, he could see 2 figures, Morgan standing, Martha seated. Before he could formulate a plan, Dr. Bennett appeared, crouching behind a water trough. "Marshal, I'm sorry. He put a gun to my head." "Not your fault," Samuel interrupted. "Is Martha hurt?" "Not yet, but he's unstable. His hand is infected, makes him even more dangerous." Abe Johnson materialized from between buildings. "Cooper's at the back with Mike, but there's no rear entrance, and the windows are too small to enter." Samuel checked his revolvers. "We need to know exactly where Martha is positioned relative to Morgan." The distant sound of an approaching stagecoach echoed down the street. "The payroll," Bennett whispered. Samuel's expression hardened. "Morgan will hear it too. Things are about to accelerate." Inside the office, Morgan paced like a caged predator, his wounded hand cradled against his chest. "He's coming, you know," Morgan muttered. "Hawkins, 15 years I've waited for this moment." "Samuel will kill you," Martha said calmly. Morgan laughed without humor. "Maybe, but first, he'll watch you die." The distant rumble of wagon wheels made Morgan straighten. "The payroll has arrived." He yanked Martha to her feet. "Now we wait for your marshal." Outside, Samuel turned to Abe. "I need to draw him out. Get him away from Martha." "How? Man's not going to just walk out and face you." Samuel's gaze fell on the marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "Yes, he will, because this isn't about the payroll. It never was." Samuel moved into the center of the street, positioned himself in front of the assayer's office, and called out, "Blackjack Morgan, this is Marshal Samuel Hawkins. Come out and face me, or I'm coming in after you." Inside, Morgan smiled and dragged Martha to the window. "Look at him, standing there like he's still the same man who arrested me 12 years ago." Martha's eyes widened at the sight of Samuel, standing tall with the twin Colts at his hips and both badges gleaming on his vest. This was Marshal Hawkins, the legend reborn. Morgan positioned Martha in front of him, his gun pressed to her temple, and kicked open the door. "Marshal Hawkins, so good of you to join our little reunion." The stagecoach was now visible at the far end of the street. "Let her go, Blackjack," Samuel said calmly. "This is between you and me." "This is about legacy," Morgan replied. "About who gets remembered and how. I think you'll let her go because if you don't, you'll never know. If you could have beaten me in a fair fight." The challenge struck at the core of Morgan's obsession. A fair fight, just you and me. One chance to prove who's faster, who's better. Morgan's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "And I'm supposed to trust the word of a lawman?" Samuel unbuckled his gun belt and laid it on the ground. Unarmed, he raised his hands. "No tricks, Blackjack. Kill an innocent woman and be remembered as a coward, or face me and be remembered as the man who outdrew Steady-Hand Hawkins." Morgan's face twisted with conflicting emotions before he finally shoved Martha aside, keeping his revolver trained on her. "Pick up your guns, Marshal. I didn't come all this way to shoot an unarmed man." Martha stumbled away, moving quickly toward shelter as Samuel retrieved his gun belt and buckled it around his waist. "How do you want to do this, Blackjack?" he asked calmly. Morgan positioned himself 20 paces from Samuel, the morning sun casting long shadows behind both men. "The traditional way, Marshal. We'll stand back to back, walk 10 paces, turn and fire, just like in the stories they'll tell about us." The morning sun cast long shadows down Dusty Creek's main street. A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, townspeople emerging from hiding to witness the confrontation between the legendary lawman and the notorious outlaw. "Back to back, 10 paces, then turn and fire," Morgan repeated, positioning himself in the center of the street. Samuel studied the outlaw carefully. Despite Morgan's apparent confidence, the infection in his wounded hand was taking its toll. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and a slight tremor ran through his arm. Weaknesses that Samuel's experienced eye couldn't miss. Cooper had emerged from his position behind the assayer's office and now stood beside Martha, his hand hovering near his holster. "This is madness," he whispered to her. "A formal duel? That went out with flintlocks." "It's not about the duel," Martha replied quietly. "It's about Samuel reclaiming who he truly is." Samuel removed his hat and handed it to Abe, who had approached, to serve as his second. The blacksmith's normally jovial face was solemn. "You sure about this, Marshal? Man's still dangerous, wounded or not." "I'm sure," Samuel replied. He glanced toward Martha, drawing strength from her steady gaze. "Some things need finishing." The stagecoach driver and passengers watched from their stopped vehicle, unwitting audience to a drama 15 years in the making. The payroll strongbox, the supposed object of Morgan's plans, sat forgotten beneath the driver's seat. Morgan had found his own second in Dr. Bennett, whom he'd gruffly ordered to stand beside him. The doctor's hands shook as he took Morgan's hat. "Your hand needs immediate medical attention," Bennett murmured. "The infection—" "Shut up," Morgan snapped. "After I kill Hawkins, you can worry about my hand." The two adversaries approached, each other slowly, each evaluating the other with practiced eyes. When they stood face to face in the center of the dusty street, Morgan spoke, his voice pitched for Samuel's ears alone. "You know why this moment had to come, don't you, Marshal? Why I broke out of Yuma and tracked you down?" "Revenge," Samuel answered simply. "For putting you away." Morgan shook his head, a strange smile playing across his lips. Not revenge. Destiny. You and me, we're the last of a dying breed. The West is changing. Railroads coming. Telegraph lines. Law and order. He spat the last words like they tasted bitter. Men like us will be forgotten unless we give them something to remember. Samuel studied Morgan's face, seeing beyond the hatred to the desperation beneath. You did all this. Broke out of prison. Hunted me down, threatened innocence just to be remembered. Better to die a legend than rot away forgotten, Morgan replied. Then louder for the crowd to hear, Are you ready, Marshal? One last dance for the history books. Samuel nodded once, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts. They turned, standing back to back in the center of the street. Count the paces, Doctor, Morgan commanded. Dr. Bennett's voice quavered as he began. 1. Samuel took his first step, feeling the familiar weight of the Colts against his thighs. 2. Morgan's boot heels clicked against the hard-packed dirt, steady despite his condition. 3. Samuel breathed deeply, clearing his mind of everything but the moment at hand. 4. The crowd watched in tense silence, witnessing something few had ever seen, a formal gunfight from the days when the West was wilder. 5. Samuel sensed rather than saw Cooper moving slowly along the boardwalk, positioning himself for a clear shot if needed. 6. Morgan's breathing had become more labored, the infection sapping his strength with every step. 7. Samuel's mind flashed to Silverton, to the boy he'd thought he'd killed, to 15 years of exile. Morgan had given him back the truth, however, unintentionally. 8. A bead of sweat trickled down Samuel's temple as he prepared for what was to come. 9. Time seemed to slow as Samuel took his final step. His hand hovered near his holster, muscles remembering a motion practiced thousands of times in his former life. 10! Before Dr. Bennett had finished the word, a subtle change came over Morgan's posture, a tensing that Samuel recognized instantly. The outlaw was going to turn early, shoot before the count was complete. Samuel reacted with the instinct that had once made him legendary. His draw was a blur of motion, his turn so swift that those watching would later swear he'd somehow anticipated. Morgan's betrayal. Both men fired simultaneously, the twin cracks of their revolvers merging into a single, thunderous report that echoed down the street. Morgan staggered, his shot going wide as Samuel's bullet found its mark. The outlaw looked down in disbelief, at the spreading red stain on his chest, then back up at Samuel, who stood steady, gun still trained on his adversary. You're still faster, Morgan gasped, a strange satisfaction in his voice. Good. That's how the story should end. He dropped to his knees, the stolen Colt falling from his fingers. They'll remember this, he whispered, toppling forward. Into the dust. For a moment, the street remained frozen in tableau. Samuel standing with his smoking Colt, Morgan face down in the dirt, the witnesses seemingly unable to comprehend the swiftness of what they'd just seen. Dr. Bennett was the first to move, rushing to check Morgan despite the obvious futility. He's dead, the doctor announced after a brief examination. Samuel holstered his weapon, the motion as smooth and practiced as if he'd never stopped wearing the guns. He walked slowly to where Morgan lay and knelt beside the fallen outlaw. I would have taken you in alive, he said quietly to the unhearing ears. That was the difference between us. As he rose, the townsfolk came forward, their voices rising in a cacophony of excitement and relief. Cooper pushed through to reach Samuel's side. Never seen anything like that, the young sheriff said, awe evident in his tone. They said you were fast, but it was like you knew he was going to cheat. Men like Morgan always cheat, Samuel replied simply. It's in their nature. Martha joined them, her eyes searching Samuel's face. Are you all right? He nodded, suddenly feeling every one of his 68 years. It's over. Is it? She asked, glancing meaningfully at the badges on his vest. Before Samuel could answer, Abe approached with his hat. "Town's talking already, Marshal, saying how you faced down the notorious Blackjack Morgan in a formal duel. Stories growing with every telling." Samuel took his hat, a wry smile touching his lips. Morgan got what he wanted then, his place in the stories. As the townspeople continued to gather, some already recounting the shootout with embellished details, Samuel stepped away from the crowd. He moved to the edge of the boardwalk, looking down the long street toward the mountains beyond. 15 years he'd hidden in the shadow of Silverton, believing himself responsible for an innocent's death. Now that burden had been lifted, but another question remained. Who was he now? The quiet horsebreaker of the past 15 years, or the legendary lawman whose reputation had just been reborn? The badge, both badges, felt heavy on his chest, a weight of responsibility he'd once carried without question. Could he carry it again? Should he? Martha appeared at his side, her presence comforting in its familiarity. "What are you thinking, Samuel?" "That some ghosts don't rest easy," he replied. "Even after you face them." She nodded in understanding. "And what does Marshal Hawkins plan to do now?" Samuel looked toward the stagecoach, where the driver was finally continuing his journey to deliver the payroll that had been at the center of so much bloodshed. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But for the first time in 15 years, I'm ready to find out." The next morning dawned clear and cold, a crisp autumn chill settling over Dusty Creek. Samuel sat on the porch of Martha's boarding house, where she had insisted he stay after his cabin's destruction. His hands moved with practiced precision as he cleaned his twin colts, restored to their rightful owner after Morgan's death. News of the showdown had spread rapidly. Already, a reporter from the territorial newspaper had arrived, eager for details about how the legendary steady-hand Hawkins had emerged from obscurity to face down the notorious Blackjack Morgan. Samuel had avoided the interview, leaving Cooper to handle the excited journalist. The young sheriff had proven himself capable during the crisis, coordinating the town's defense and managing the aftermath with unexpected maturity. "Coffee." Martha appeared in the doorway, offering a steaming cup. "Much obliged," Samuel replied, setting aside his cleaning cloth to accept the drink. She settled into the chair beside him, watching as the town came to life below. Morgan's gang members had been transported out at first light, bound for Yuma. Under heavy guard, the mine payroll had been safely delivered, and the businesses of Dusty Creek were returning to their normal routines. "Cooper tells me he offered you a permanent deputy position," Martha said after a comfortable silence. Samuel nodded, sipping the strong coffee. "He did. And told him I'd think on it." Martha studied his profile, noting how he seemed more at ease than she'd ever seen him, as if a great weight had been lifted. "You're not staying, are you?" Samuel's gaze remained fixed on the distant mountains. "Not as a lawman, no. Because of Silverton. Even knowing now that it wasn't your bullet that killed that boy?" "Partly," Samuel acknowledged. "Even if it wasn't. My bullet, I was responsible. Should have approached differently, been more careful." He set down his coffee cup. "But it's more than that. The badge represents something. A responsibility to always stand between danger and innocent folk. Not sure I want that burden again, not full-time." Before Martha could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A large man on a magnificent black stallion rode up the street, heading directly for the boarding house. Samuel straightened, recognition flooding his features. "Thunder?" The rider dismounted with the easy grace of a lifelong horseman, leading the stallion toward the porch. "Marshal Hawkins," he called. "Thought you might be wanting this fella back." Samuel descended the steps, approaching the horse with undisguised emotion. Thunder nickered softly, recognizing his master despite their separation. "Where did you find him?" Samuel asked, running a hand along the stallion's powerful neck. "Wandering about 5 miles south," the rider replied. "Recognized him from your description. Not many horses that fine around these parts. Name's Jeremiah. Curtis worked the Circle C ranch. Your sheriff helped me track you down." Samuel pulled a few coins from his pocket, but Curtis waved them away. "No charge, Marshal. Just glad to reunite a man with his horse. Besides," he added with a wide grin, "not every day a man gets to do a favor for steady-hand Hawkins. Makes for a good story to tell the grandkids." After Curtis departed, Samuel stood with Thunder in the street, lost in thought. Martha joined, him patting the stallion's flank. "Seems fate's determined to reconnect you with your past, one piece at a time." "Maybe," Samuel allowed, "or maybe just giving me what I need to decide on my future." Later that afternoon, Samuel rode Thunder to the cemetery on the outskirts of town. The fresh grave bearing Morgan's name lay at the far edge, separated from the respectable citizens, as if his evil might somehow contaminate them, even in death. Samuel dismounted, standing silently before the simple wooden marker. No one else had attended the burial. Morgan had died as he had lived, alone and feared. "You were right about one thing," Samuel said to the grave. "Times are changing. Men like us, the gunslingers, the manhunters, we belong to a fading era." The wind whispered through the pines surrounding the cemetery, nature's only response to his words. "But you were wrong about how to be remembered," he continued. "It's not about dying in some blaze of glory. It's about what you leave behind, how you've changed the lives around you." He turned at the sound of approaching footsteps. Sheriff Cooper stood a respectful distance away, hat in hands. "Didn't mean to interrupt," the young lawman said. "Just paying my respects. Seemed like the proper thing, even for an outlaw." Samuel nodded in approval. "The badge means respecting the law, even for those who don't." Cooper stepped closer. "Been thinking about what you said yesterday, about Morgan having been cavalry once. Made me wonder how many men start out meaning to do right, then somehow lose their way." "More than you'd think," Samuel replied. "Line between lawman and outlaw isn't always as clear as we'd like to believe." They stood in companionable silence before Cooper spoke again. "Marshal, about that deputy position, still thinking on it?" Samuel interrupted gently. "Actually," Cooper said, "I was going to suggest something different." He seemed nervous, choosing his words carefully. "The territorial governor's office telegraphed this morning. They're looking for experienced men to train new marshals. Someone who knows the territory, understands tracking, can teach how to handle dangerous situations." Samuel raised an eyebrow, waiting for Cooper to continue. "I took the liberty of putting your name forward," the sheriff admitted. "As a consultant, not a full deputy. You'd work when you choose, share your knowledge, without having to wear the badge full-time." The proposal caught Samuel by surprise. "A teacher? Who better?" Cooper asked earnestly. "You've forgotten more about manhunting than most lawmen will. Ever learn? Seems a shame to let all that experience disappear." Samuel looked back at Morgan's grave, thinking of the outlaw's obsession with legacy and being remembered. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "But first, there's something I need to do." As they rode back toward town, Cooper curious but respectful enough not to press for details, Samuel felt a sense of clarity that had eluded him for 15 years. Morgan's appearance had forced him to confront his past, but the future remained. His to choose, and for the first time since Silverton, he was ready to choose it. 2 days after Morgan's death, Samuel stood at his burned cabin, sifting through ashes until he found a small metal box containing mementos of his past, including a daguerreotype of his long-dead wife Claire. "Been running for too long?" he whispered. The sound of approaching horses interrupted his reflection. Martha and Cooper rode up, their expressions grave. "Wire from Fort Laramie," Cooper said urgently. "The transport taking Morgan's men to Yuma was ambushed. 3 guards killed, prisoners freed." By who? Samuel asked. Remains of the Clayton gang. The Tanner brothers reunited with their old outfit. They're heading this way, coming for you and the town that helped you. How many? At least 12, well-armed, coming today or tomorrow. Samuel gazed toward the horizon. We can't evacuate in time. We make our stand here. Back in town, Samuel transformed the jailhouse into a command center. Maps covered the walls, marked with defensive positions. You're taking charge, Cooper observed. Old habits, Samuel replied. Been in this situation before, from both sides. A wounded messenger arrived from an ambushed stagecoach, barely alive. They're coming, he gasped. Tanner gang said Dusty Creek will burn by dawn. Samuel organized the town's defenses with calm efficiency. Women and children sheltered in the stone church, while able-bodied men took positions according to his instructions. Barricades rose at strategic points. As midnight approached, Samuel stood atop the jailhouse roof, scanning the horizon. They'll come from the south, he told Cooper. More cover that way, moon behind them. Just before 3 a.m., Samuel raised his hand for silence. Horses, moving slow, no shoes. He raised his spyglass. At least 15, more than we thought. The church bell rang 3 times, signaling defenders to their final positions. From the darkness, a voice called out, "Marshal Hawkins, send yourself out, and maybe the rest live." Samuel recognized Eli Tanner's voice. "And if I don't?" he called. "Back, then we burn Dusty Creek to the ground and kill everyone inside." "I'm coming out to talk," Samuel announced. He met Tanner between the town and tree line. "Been a long time, Marshal," Tanner smirked. "You've gone grey since you broke up the Clayton gang." "And you've gone stupid," Samuel replied evenly. "I know. You've positioned men on both sides of town. Your brother Jesse is probably working around to the north entrance." Tanner's expression hardened. "Last chance, Hawkins. Come with us, or watch this town burn." "I've spent 15 years running from who I am," Samuel said quietly. "Not anymore. Take your men and ride out. That's the only warning you get." Tanner's hand twitched toward his gun. Samuel's draw flashed with impossible speed, his bullet striking. Tanner's arm with surgical precision. "That's my answer," Samuel called, backing toward town. Gunfire erupted from both sides as the Tanner gang attacked from north and south. Samuel held his defenders in check until the riders were 30 yards. Out then gave the signal. Coordinated rifle fire dropped 3 riders immediately. Concealed townspeople pulled ropes stretched across the street, toppling more horses. The remaining outlaws dismounted, using fallen horses as cover. "They're better than I expected," Samuel muttered. "Cooper, take 5 men. Circle behind the northern group. I'll handle these ones." As dawn approached, the battle for Dusty Creek raged on, the outcome far from certain. The Tanner gang had come for everything Samuel cared about, and found him ready. Dawn revealed the battle's toll. 4 buildings ablaze, bodies in the street, 2 townspeople among them. Samuel directed defenders from the general store, while Cooper's men were pinned down in the blacksmith shop. "Running low on ammunition," Abe reported. "Maybe 10 rounds left." Samuel nodded. "Make each one count." He assessed the outlaws' positions. At least 8 remained, moving closer. "They're trying to surround us." A bullet splintered the window frame near his head. Eli Tanner called from behind a wagon. "Give it up, Hawkins! Town's half burned already!" Samuel motioned for Abe to follow him to the back door. "We need to break." Their encirclement. One good shot from the church steeple can change everything. They slipped through alleys to the church, where Martha met them with a shotgun. They tried to rush the doors. We drove them back. Inside, frightened women and children huddled in pews while Dr. Bennett tended the wounded. From the steeple, Samuel spotted Jesse Tanner and 2 men flanking their former position. "There," Samuel pointed. "Jesse's making his move." Abe raised the rifle. Samuel adjusted the sights. "Aim for the man with the dynamite." Abe's shot dropped the outlaw, disrupting their maneuver. Meanwhile, Samuel spotted Eli leading 3 men. "Toward the church. Keep Jesse pinned," Samuel told Abe. "I'll deal with his brother." Samuel descended quickly, told Martha to hold the main entrance, then slipped outside through a side door. He caught Eli and his men preparing to dynamite the church doors. "That's far enough, Eli." The four outlaws turned, hands dropping to weapons but freezing at the sight of Samuel, twin Colts drawn. "4 against 1, Marshal," Eli snarled, his wounded right arm hanging useless. "Even for steady-hand Hawkins, those aren't good odds." "Better than you think," Samuel replied. "Your brother is pinned down. Half your men are dead. Last chance to surrender." "Take him," Eli ordered. Before they could clear their holsters, Samuel fired 4 shots in rapid succession. 3 men dropped, each with precise wounds to shoulder or gun arm. Eli managed to draw left-handed, but his shot went wild as Samuel's bullet knocked the gun from his hand. "Told you," Samuel said quietly. "Odds aren't what they seem." Across town, Cooper's men pressed their advantage as Jesse's group fell into disarray. "You didn't kill us," Eli said, confusion evident. "That's the difference between a lawman and an outlaw," Samuel replied as townspeople emerged to secure the prisoners. Martha approached as the prisoners were led away. 4 men, 4 shots, and not one killed. "The stories about your accuracy weren't exaggerated." Samuel holstered his weapons. "Never wanted to kill if I could avoid it. That's why they called me Steady Hand." He gazed across town where the last pockets of resistance were surrendering. "It's over." "Not quite," Martha said softly. "Rebuilding comes next." Cooper joined them, face smudged but triumphant. "Jesse." Tanner surrendered when he saw his brother captured. "The rest are throwing down their weapons. You held your ground well," Samuel told him. "Town owes you its life." "Town owes you," Cooper corrected. "I've learned more about being a lawman in the past few days than in all my previous experience." As they walked through town, citizens emerged from shelters. Despite the damage and losses, their faces showed pride. They had stood against a superior force and prevailed, and at their center walked the man whose legend had been reborn amid fire and gun smoke. Marshal Samuel Steady Hand Hawkins, no longer running from his past. The aftermath of battle brought a strange quiet to Dusty Creek as townspeople tended the wounded, extinguished fires, and secured prisoners. 8 dead, Cooper reported on the jailhouse porch. 5 of theirs, 3 of ours, 7 wounded on their side, 4 of ours. Telegraph's working again, he continued. Fort Laramie is dispatching troops for the prisoners. Martha joined them with coffee. Bennett says everyone should recover, even Eli Tanner, though his arm might never work right. Small price for his crimes, Cooper observed. What happens? Now, Samuel? Martha asked. When life returns to normal, Samuel gazed toward the mountains. Depends on what normal means nowadays. Abe approached, leading Thunder. Found him grazing behind the church, calm as you please. Samuel stroked his stallion's neck. Good boy, steady as always. Like his owner, Martha observed. By evening, Samuel stood beside the fresh graves of the 3 townspeople who had fallen. Michael Donovan, Thomas Potter, and Sarah Wilson. Wasn't your fault, Martha said, joining him. They chose to stand and fight. Because I asked them to, Samuel replied quietly. Because it was their home, she corrected, same as it became yours. Territorial Governor's Office telegraphed, Martha continued, sending commendations. You'll be in papers across the territory. So much for anonymity, Samuel muttered. Later, Cooper handed him a telegram. From the Territorial Governor himself. Samuel read it silently, then tucked it into his vest pocket. Something important? Martha asked. Job offer, Samuel replied. Governors forming a special marshal's unit to deal with the territory's worst trouble spots. Wants me to lead it. You going to accept? Cooper asked. Haven't decided. Need to sleep on it. That night, Samuel turned the decision over in his mind. Taking the job meant returning to the life he'd abandoned after Silverton. Refusing meant continuing to deny a fundamental truth. He was, and had always been, a lawman at heart. By dawn, Samuel had made his decision. He rose early, pinned both badges to his vest, and found Martha cooking breakfast. "You're taking the job," she said, noting his determined expression. Samuel nodded. "Some things you can't outrun forever. The town will miss you," she said. "I'll miss you." "Who said anything about leaving?" Samuel replied. "Governor's letting me choose my base of operations. No reason it can't be here." Martha brightened. "You mean Dusty Creek's as good a place as any to establish a marshal's office, central location, telegraph connection, people I trust." He met her gaze. People worth coming home to. Outside, the town was already rebuilding. Samuel watched from the porch, at peace with himself for the first time in 15 years. The weight of Silverton had lifted, the burden of hiding his past, removed by necessity and choice. He touched the badges on his vest. The marshal had returned, not just to enforce the law, but to find his place in a changing West. Justice had been served in Dusty Creek, not just for the Tanner gang, but for Samuel himself. 2 months after the battle with the Tanner gang, Dusty Creek had transformed. New buildings replaced those destroyed in the fighting, their fresh lumber standing bright against the weathered structures that had survived. The town had not only rebuilt, but expanded, with a proper marshal's office now standing beside the jailhouse. A crisp autumn morning found Samuel on the porch of that new office, watching as a stagecoach rolled into town. He wore his marshal's badge prominently on a new vest, the deputy star having been returned to Cooper, who continued to serve as sheriff with growing confidence. "That'll be the circuit judge," Cooper said, joining Samuel on the porch. "Right on schedule." Samuel nodded. The Tanner brothers and their surviving gang members were finally facing trial after being held at Fort Laramie. Cooper would be testifying, along with several other townspeople who had witnessed their crimes. "Town looks good," Samuel observed. "Hard to believe what happened here just a couple months ago. People remember, though," Cooper replied. "They won't forget what you did." Samuel had indeed accepted the territorial governor's appointment, establishing his headquarters in Dusty Creek. From there, he coordinated a small team of deputies who dealt with the territory's most pressing threats. The arrangement allowed him to maintain his roots in the town while still serving the broader needs of justice. Martha emerged from her general store across the street, waving a telegram. "News from Yuma," she called, crossing to join them. "Thought you'd want to know." Samuel took the paper, scanning its contents. "Morgan's gang members arrived safely, all accounted for." Cooper let out a low whistle. "Full circle. You put them. Away they escaped, and now they're back where they belong. Justice moves in strange ways sometimes," Samuel agreed. The circuit judge, a portly man with spectacles and a serious demeanor, descended from the stagecoach, looking around curiously at the town that had become somewhat famous in territorial circles. "Marshal Hawkins," he called, recognizing Samuel immediately. "An honor to meet you, sir. Your reputation precedes you." Samuel stepped forward to shake the judge's hand. "Judge Harmon, welcome to Dusty Creek." "I've read the reports about what happened here," Harmon said, studying Samuel with undisguised interest. "Most remarkable. They're already adding it to the stories about you." Samuel suppressed a grimace. The last thing he wanted was more legends attached to his name, but he was learning to accept that some things couldn't be controlled. "Town's prepared. And for the proceedings," he said, changing the subject. "Everything's ready whenever you are." As Cooper led the judge toward his accommodations, Martha lingered behind with Samuel. "Still uncomfortable with the attention?" she asked perceptively. "Man's just doing his job," Samuel replied. "Don't need to make it into something more." Martha smiled. "Some people have a way of becoming symbols, whether they want to or not. You gave this town something it needed. Not just protection, but a reminder that standing for what's right matters." Samuel couldn't argue with that. In the weeks since the battle, he'd observed a new confidence in the townsfolk, a sense of shared purpose that transcended the mere fact of survival. That evening, a small celebration was held at the saloon in honor of the judge's arrival. Samuel attended briefly, still unaccustomed to being the center of attention after so many years of deliberate anonymity. As he made his way home, to the new house he'd built to replace his destroyed cabin, this time within the town limits, Samuel paused at the edge of Dusty Creek. From this vantage point, he could see the entire settlement spread out below, lights glowing warmly in windows, smoke rising from chimneys into the star-filled sky. 15 years ago, he had arrived here broken, running from his past and the man he had been. Now, having confronted both, he had found something he hadn't expected, a future. The next morning, the trial of the Tanner gang began in the town hall. Samuel testified matter-of-factly about the events, neither embellishing nor downplaying his role. When asked about his famous shooting display at the church, 4 shots, 4 men disabled, no fatalities, he simply stated he had done what was necessary to protect the townspeople with minimal loss of life. Judge Harmon seemed both impressed and slightly puzzled by Samuel's modesty. "Marshal Hawkins," he said during a recess, "I must confess you're not what I expected." "How so, Your Honor?" Samuel asked. "The stories paint you as larger than life." "Steady hand, Hawkins, the man who never misses, the lawman outlaws fear above all others." Harmon adjusted his spectacles. "But you seem remarkably human." Samuel smiled slightly. "Legends tend to grow in the telling, Judge. The truth is usually simpler." "Perhaps," Harmon conceded, "or perhaps the most remarkable thing about truly great men is that they don't recognize their own greatness." The trial concluded with the expected verdict: guilty on all counts. The Tanner brothers and their surviving men would return to Yuma prison, this time with additional sentences that ensured they would never again see freedom. As the prisoners were led away, Eli Tanner paused before Samuel, his right arm still hanging useless at his side. "Oh, could have killed me, Marshal," he said, his voice low enough that only Samuel could hear. "Why didn't you?" Samuel studied the outlaw's face, seeing genuine confusion there. "Because the badge isn't just about hunting men down," he replied. "It's about bringing them to justice, the right way." Tanner seemed to consider this before being led away. Samuel doubted the man truly understood, but perhaps a seed had been planted. Even after decades of enforcing the law, Samuel had never lost hope that people could change, though he harbored no illusions about how rarely they chose to. With the trial concluded and the prisoners departed, Dusty Creek settled back into its routine. For Samuel, this meant dividing his time between local duties and occasional journeys to trouble spots across the territory. True to Cooper's offer months before, he had also begun training a new generation of lawmen, sharing the knowledge and skills that had made him legendary. Young deputies from across the territory came to learn from Steady Hand Hawkins, many arriving with eyes full of hero worship and leaving with a more grounded understanding of what it truly meant to uphold the law. One evening, as winter's first snow dusted the streets of Dusty Creek, Samuel sat with Martha on the porch of his new home. Thunder grazed contentedly in a small paddock nearby, his dark coat standing out against the gathering white. "Cooper tells me you're turning down speaking engagements," Martha remarked, wrapping a shawl tighter around her shoulders against the chill. "Says the territorial governor wanted you to address the new legislative session about law enforcement needs." Samuel nodded. "Governor understands. I'm more useful in the field than behind a podium." "Still avoiding the legend," she observed. "Just Trying to live up to the man behind it," Samuel replied. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the snow fell more heavily, transforming Dusty Creek into a scene from a Christmas card. So much had changed in the past months, yet some things remained beautifully constant, like the peace of a winter evening and the company of someone who truly understood you. "You know," Martha said finally, "for a man who spent 15 years trying to disappear, you've made quite an impression on this town, on all of us." Samuel reached over to take her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them as their relationship deepened. "Some legends fade," he said quietly, "but the things that matter, home, family, doing what's right, those endure." As the snow continued to fall, Samuel Hawkins, once the most feared lawman in the West, now simply a man who had found his place in the world, watched over the town that had become his home. The duality no longer troubled him. Marshal and horsebreaker, legend and man, past and present, all had found their balance at last. The badge on his vest caught the last light of day, gleaming briefly before twilight settled over Dusty Creek. Some things never faded after all. They just found new ways to shine,